The hush around the Nancy Guthrie investigation broke deep into the night when federal agents returned to the main scene with a fresh sense of urgency. What had first seemed like a standard missing person report suddenly took a sharp and dramatic turn as investigators revisited the Guthrie home under the cover of darkness. The timeline of her disappearance immediately disturbed those on the case, largely because it lacked the usual signs of turmoil or struggle. Everything about the night Nancy vanished looked normal. She had spent a calm evening with family, eating together and doing the ordinary, forgettable things that make up a typical home night. There were no reported arguments, no visible tension, and no hints that anything was wrong. Nancy was dropped back at her house shortly before 10 p.m., a detail confirmed by law enforcement, though officials have stayed notably silent about who gave that final ride. When she arrived, the neighborhood was quiet. No neighbors reported screams and no strange sounds were heard. Yet by morning, Nancy had vanished. When investigators first entered the house, they found something even more unsettling. Almost nothing. No broken glass, no forced entry, and no evidence of a fight. In criminal profiling, silence can be far more alarming than chaos. A disappearance from a secured home with no disruption usually points to one of three possibilities: careful planning, someone familiar to the victim, or a scenario where resistance was never possible. That uncertainty likely triggered the swift escalation to federal involvement. The FBI doesn't typically step into local disappearances unless there are signs of organized activity, interstate elements, or digital angles beyond what local departments can handle. That federal footprint grew heavier when the home, already processed and released, was suddenly locked down again. Scenes are rarely reopened unless new information forces investigators to reconsider everything. Their return suggested something discovered or something missing didn't fit the original story. The window of NY's disappearance was extremely tight, only a few hours. That narrow gap implies whoever acted either knew exactly when to move or that Nancy left the house in a way that didn't feel threatening to her at the time. Quietly, that possibility becomes a primary focus, because once someone leaves willingly, the entire investigation changes shape. But if she didn't leave willingly, then the lack of a struggle becomes even more central. Before media attention surged and before the family's public pleas began, something happened inside those walls that turned an ordinary night into a high-stakes federal operation. The FBI's early presence made it clear this wasn't just a search for someone missing, it was the unraveling of something layered and strategic that was still in motion. Federal agencies shift into a distinct mode when they see patterns of coordination. The emergence of alleged ransom messages only reinforced that shift, since digital threats and encrypted channels sit squarely under federal reach. As the case moved into a containment phase, the flow of public information slowed to a drip. That's a common investigative tactic meant to protect leverage. Every detail released narrows what authorities can control, especially if ransom or managed contact is involved. The public often reads silence as stagnation, but it usually means the opposite. Momentum is building behind closed doors. In the Guthrie case, investigators weren't only trying to find a location, they were hunting the designer of the event. The home was no longer simply a residence, it became a storage vault of physical and digital signals that could explain the entire operation. Every object removed and every surface tested was part of establishing NY's normal routine, so any deviation could be identified. From the shoes near the entryway to the phone resting on its charger, everything was examined to see whether Nancy had been interrupted mid-routine or whether she never planned to leave at all. The fact that nothing seemed disturbed became the most important early finding. The technical side of the investigation intensified as digital forensic teams began reconstructing NY's last hours through the lens of modern connectivity. With little physical evidence at the scene, the witnesses became routers, smart systems, and mobile devices. Investigators moved far beyond basic call records, studying the digital pulse of the home. They checked router logs for unusual connections, sudden data spikes, or the presence of an unauthorized device on the network. Every timestamp was matched against phone location behavior. Did services stop abruptly, or did movement continue in a way that suggested a controlled exit? This type of reconstruction can be more dependable than physical interpretation because it's binary. A device connects or it doesn't. A sensor triggers or it doesn't. At the Guthrie home, the steady quiet of these systems created a chilling contrast to her disappearance, suggesting either a technically skilled bypass or a method that never activated sensors at all. As federal agents tightened their theories, attention widened to include the digital patterns of people closest to NY. This is the phase where the public often loses the thread of the story. With gag orders and sensitive data recovery requiring strict secrecy, the FBI's silence was tactical, meant to prevent any watching party from realizing how much progress was being made. Agents searched for pre-planning, digital traces showing research, coordination, or preparation weeks ahead of the crime. When ransom demands tied to cryptocurrency surfaced, the case became twice as complex. These messages were reportedly sent to media outlets instead of police, a classic sign of an offender trying to control the narrative as much as the victim. The use of Bitcoin wallets for a $6 million demand pushed federal authorities to bring in cyber task forces to trace the message origins and examine blockchain activity tied to the listed addresses. A major shift came when focus turned toward a family member's residence. Under bright forensic lighting, investigators spent hours documenting the property, an action that triggered immediate public speculation. But in high-stakes disappearances, these visits are often about verification, not direct blame. Investigators needed to confirm exactly what everyone did on Nancy's last night. The goal was to close any cracks in the timeline because even a 5-minute gap can redirect a federal investigation. Tension exploded when leaked interrogation footage appeared, showing the intense psychological pressure federal agents applied to NY's son-in-law. The video presented a brutal shift from calm cooperation to emotional breakdown. For more than 6 hours, agents used a mix of digital evidence and strategic confrontation, placing his own communications in front of him. The growing weight, traced calls, damaging messages, gradually tore down his defense. During the interrogation, his physical and emotional condition visibly worsened as agents laid out a timeline of financial collapse. Investigators uncovered massive debt, maxed out credit cards, overdrawn accounts, and an approaching foreclosure. The motive was outlined with clinical clarity. NY's multi-million-dollar estate was positioned as the only barrier between him and total ruin. The questioning revealed Nancy had been preparing to change her will, an action that would have removed any chance of inheritance for the suspect. That detail shifted the case from a puzzling vanishing to a targeted act fueled by desperation. Agents pressed him about his search history, which allegedly contained disturbing queries about kidnapping, elderly survival without medication, and the legal differences between kidnapping and murder. Each search term tightened the noose, pointing to planning rather than accident, an attempt to buy a financial future by gambling with a human life. The interrogation reached its most volatile stage when the focus turned to logistics, exposing a larger plot that stretched beyond one person's panic. Inside the room, the FBI introduced the suspected involvement of his cousin Marcus, a name that had hovered at the edges of the case from the start. The pressure shifted instantly when agents revealed Marcus was not only in custody, but was giving a detailed account of the abduction. That disclosure crushed the son-in-law's remaining control as it became clear his accomplice had flipped to protect himself. The plan, as it emerged from the evidence, was a calculated attempt to trade NY's life for an enormous payout, but it was also a countdown. NY's health became the main pressure point. Agents emphasized that every hour without her life-sustaining medication pushed the situation closer to a first-degree murder charge. The realization that his escape was turning into a death sentence pushed him toward a partial confession, one that finally began to connect theory to reality. While the interrogation offered one set of answers, NY's neighborhood delivered another, even darker angle. Investigators discovered a coordinated campaign of witness intimidation aimed at silencing the people who could have cracked the case in the first day. Neighbors who initially wanted to help suddenly stopped talking, replacing cooperation with fear. Follow-up investigation revealed multiple homes had received threatening 3 a.m. visits, anonymous calls, and typed letters placed in mailboxes. One witness, a retired teacher who could see the Guthrie driveway clearly, reported a dark SUV sitting with its lights off for over an hour the night Nancy disappeared. Another neighbor, coming off a shift, noticed someone inside the vehicle using a glowing device, likely communicating with someone in the house. These witnesses were the missing link, but they had been muted by targeted warnings, suggesting the kidnappers were still watching closely. The intimidation wasn't limited to generic threats. The psychological tactics suggested the perpetrators knew personal details about the neighbors. One young mother next door found a note slipped beneath her infant's car seat, an invasive, terrifying message that the offenders were comfortable entering private spaces even after the abduction. That discovery raised an unsettling question. Were the threats coming from the kidnappers, or was there a deeper effort to control the story? Some experts argued the FBI's strict secrecy may have unintentionally allowed the perpetrators to operate more freely in the neighborhood. That tension between investigative control and public transparency hit a breaking point when it surfaced that at least 2 neighbors had security footage contradicting the official claim of no visual evidence. The footage, reportedly held back for more than a week, supposedly showed a second suspect working behind the house, suggesting the abduction was a coordinated 2-person maneuver. As day 9 approached, the explanation about technological limitations began to fall apart. For more than a week, the public and the family were told NY's doorbell camera failed to capture the incident because there was no cloud storage subscription. The FBI and Google Nest maintained the footage was deleted and unrecoverable. But the sudden recovery of the video on the 9th day suggested a harsher reality. Either the delay was a major technical failure, or it was a deliberate investigative decision to hold the evidence while agents positioned their moves. The recovered footage itself was chilling, showing a masked, armed person calmly approaching the front door and using a potted plant to partially block the camera's view. Even with the disguise, the person's movements and equipment drew the attention of profilers who began linking the behavior back to associates tied to the son-in-law. The video didn't just give shape to the crime, it revealed the investigation had been operating with a level of hidden knowledge that the public, and even the family, was not allowed to see. The final stage of the case narrowed to a remote stretch of road south of Tucson, where the theory of a financially driven plot collided with a federal tactical interception. A man detained in a high-stakes traffic stop near the Mexican border was allegedly driving the same dark SUV seen idling in NY's neighborhood 9 days earlier. The arrest represented the peak of a massive multi-agency operation involving the FBI's hostage rescue team alongside local SWAT support. With the suspect in custody, the priority shifted from identifying the players to recovering Nancy Guthrie alive. The detained man, found with travel documents and a large amount of cash, suggested the ransom plan had unraveled into a desperate attempt to flee. Federal agents, no longer protecting their digital advantage, used GPS history to identify remote Arizona desert locations that had reportedly been searched on a laptop weeks earlier. As tactical teams moved into the desert, forensic review of the doorbell video delivered one more crucial motive detail. Analysts concluded the masked person wasn't only trying to block the camera, they were waiting for a signal from inside the house. That supported the inside job theory. One person ensured the victim was restrained or incapacitated before the second entered to complete the removal. The $300 test deposit into the Bitcoin wallet, once viewed as minor, was reinterpreted as a desperate check by an accomplice to see whether the feds had frozen the account or were tracking the blockchain in real time. That small act of amateur caution gave cyber investigators a hook, allowing them to trace the digital handshake back to a specific mobile hotspot used by the son-in-law's associates. The walls closed in on a conspiracy that was as sloppy as it was cruelly designed. The emotional peak arrived when Savannah Guthrie made her final public plea, an appeal investigators later described as a strategic effort to pressure the remaining conspirators into a mistake. By emphasizing Nancy's medical fragility and humanizing her suffering, the family and the FBI created an environment where the fear of a murder charge began to outweigh the hope of payment. The pressure worked. Information pulled from the latest interrogations led agents to a small rented structure near a rural mining town. Hostage rescue teams and paramedics swarmed the scene, prepared for the worst. Nancy Guthrie was recovered alive, though severely weakened after going without essential medication, ending a 9-day nightmare that had shocked the nation. Medical staff described her survival as astonishing given her age and the conditions of captivity. The aftermath of the Guthrie case has reshaped public perception of digital privacy and federal tactics. The revelation that deleted cloud footage could be recovered fueled national debate about what deleted truly means and how transparent major tech companies like Google really are. It became increasingly clear that the 9-day delay was likely strategic, prioritizing the capture of a wider network over immediately releasing visual proof. as the son-in-law and alleged accomplices now face a long list of federal charges including kidnapping, conspiracy, and extortion. The case stands as a grim example of how financial desperation can erupt inside the most ordinary suburban setting. Tucson streets may look normal again, but the sense of safety has been permanently shaken. The case proved that even without signs of a struggle, the digital traces and psychological patterns left behind by greed eventually lead straight back to the front door. NY's recovery reflects the persistence of federal investigators, even if that persistence unfolded behind a wall of secrecy that many still find deeply disturbing.